he was bigger than boxing.
I am the greatest.
The price of freedom comes high. I have paid, but I am free.
Muhammad Ali. Tune in or stream. Starts Sunday, September 19th at 8/7 Central, only on PBS.
And the first question, I'm sure this is the first question that people ask. With the miles of documentary and even fictional content on Muhammad Ali, what angle did your team want to approach that was going to evolve his story in addition to fleshing out the man and his legacy?
Yeah, we came to this in part because we felt like there wasn't something, even though there are many great films about Ali, they tend to focus on a single chapter or sort of aspect of Ali's life. And we felt like the way that we do biography and we sort of try to do an intimate portrait and go in depth with people, that we have this opportunity to weave all of these different parts of Ali's life together in a way that helps us understand him in 3 dimensions. And so we could do the boxing, of course, obviously, but there's so much more to his story than the boxing. And so we wanted to weave that together with his spiritual journey, his faith and how that evolves over time, with his family story, his wives, his children, his childhood, with his draft resistance and the sort of political conversation, which of course is also, people sometimes forget that was a faith decision. That was about his religion, even though we think of it as a kind of political statement, and bring all those things together as a way to understand him kind of in a more comprehensive and in-depth way. And it also allows us to understand the context of the culture and the society around him and how much he's both influencing that society and influenced by it.
Wow. So boxing is, at its core, a brutal sport, while those who rhapsodize over it often called it the sweet science.
Yeah.
What did you learn about boxing in researching for the documentary, and what is your takeaway regarding the practice of the sport?
Yeah, I learned a lot about boxing because I knew very little about it. I've never really watched boxing. I've not been a boxing fan. And so for me, as with any project, right, it's a process of discovery. We don't have to be experts going in. The idea is that we're going to learn a lot over the years we work on a project, and we're going to bring in experts and get their help and have consultants and advisors who can guide us. And we get to learn a lot about something, which is the great pleasure of getting to do this work. But yeah, I was a total boxing novice. And so I learned a lot about the sport. I learned a lot about Ali and his style, and of course his fights and the important fights. And one of the interesting things about Ali's fights is that they're never just about who wins or loses in the ring. There's always bigger stakes to the fight. And a lot of that is because of the way that Ali himself kind of scripts them. He creates these narratives around the fights. He is probably the best boxing promoter who's ever lived, even though that was not his job. He did the job better, I think, than the promoters did, and they would have said that. But yeah, I learned a lot about boxing, but it is brutal. And there are fights of Ali's that are really hard to watch. Of course, the late fights, Holmes and Berbick, you can barely look at them. But, the third Frazier fight, the Thrill in Manila, is just brutal. And, we also have both experts and, journalists who covered those fights who I think help us understand both what's going on in the fight and also express their own emotions about it. In the third Frazier fight, we have folks like Dave Kindred who covered that fight, just talking about how, and Jerry Eisenberg talking about how painful it was to watch. And even though they're covering it as journalists, it's still, they care about this person who they've spent all these years covering and getting to know. And you go, I don't want to watch this anymore.
Where do you find Ali, the human being, and what has been written about him, the miles of film, video, or the words of the man himself, and why?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's always what we're getting at. We want to get to know him in an intimate way. And I think that with Ali, our good fortune as filmmakers was that he never shied away from a camera. He's probably one of the most well-documented people of the 20th century. And so there's just this incredible wealth of archival material of him speaking his mind, explaining his point of view, clowning, rhyming, joking, doing magic tricks, engaging with fans, picking up little kids, pretending to fight little kids, joking around with people on the street. I mean, every part of it, you get to see he really put himself out there on display in this way. And I think authentically so. Like, as much as he did that clowning and the joking and the performing, and he certainly was a great performer, I think it also always reflects him in an authentic way. And so we get to know him through this archival material, and there's tons of it. And so our team collected more than 500 hours of footage, more than 15,000 photographs. And that's just what we put into our log for our editors to work with. There's even more out there that we sifted through. And so we had all this incredible material. And, in some of our films, we have, in our Jackie Robinson film, for example, we did a biography of Jackie Robinson a few years ago. There's lots of footage of Jackie talking. We get to hear from him, but not enough. There were other things that he wrote that we wanted to hear about. And so we had an actor read some of the things he'd written in order to get more of that. We did not need to do that in this case, right? We didn't have to have anyone else speaking for Muhammad Ali. He speaks for himself plenty. And so it's just amazing to get to know him. And I think it really makes him come alive. I mean, you really get to see who he is. The other thing is that he is flawed, as we all are, and he also didn't shy away from admitting to those flaws and considering them and trying to atone for them, especially later in his life. And I think that also, in another way, makes our job easier, because we're never going to shy away from showing the person in all their three dimensions, including their flaws. But he owned up to that stuff. He talked about how he didn't always treat the women in his life well. He talked about how he regretted turning his back on Malcolm X, how he treated Joe Frazier. And so those things, I think, also make him more real, more human, to understand him as this person who is, yes, the greatest, but also imperfect.
Do you think there was anything that you guys found that had not been seen before? Was there a nugget that you unearthed?
Yeah, there's definitely some footage in there that's never been transferred, that's never been seen. So we have some great 8mm home movies from a neighbor of the Clay family in Louisville. That's really wonderful, and that has that intimate feel of home movies, clowning around on the porch with kids from the neighborhood and stuff as a young man coming back home, to see his family. And then one of the other really great finds that our producer, Stephanie Jenkins, who does our archival footage research, found was at an archive in Pennsylvania, where they had collected, the archivist there had found, abandoned by a production company years ago, a bunch of film, and kind of saved it from the dumpster and then put it on a shelf, a box that said Ali on it. And so when our producer came poking, she pulled it out and cranked through it and discovered that there was color 16mm footage of the Thrilla in Manila that no one had ever seen before. And it is spectacular.
Oh my God, that's great.
And it's really, it's right up on the apron, it's right there. So you're just, some of it's slow motion, and you just see the punches reverberating, and that's just such a brutal fight. And so it's like you've seen that fight before. You've never seen that fight before. It's really amazing.
Listen to you up at the apron.
See, I learned something about boxing.
This is Patrick McDonald for HollywoodChicago.com. Copyright 2021.